There's callers on the line there. There's Jacob from New York City. I'll see if he's there. Is Jacob there?
Hey, Alan, how you doing today?
Not too bad. Yeah.
Listen, my question is, there's so much with the occult as far as, like the EU building being the rebuilt Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
And, it seems to me that, I don't think there's reptilian aliens or anything, man.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be some sort of overarching doctrine or overarching religion belief.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? I mean, what are they drawing all the inspiration?
Well, it's easy to get inspiration when you're selected at university as a bright young man who will serve them very well and paid handsomely, and you're guaranteed the doors will just open for you, which they do. So greed is a good factor for recruitment, but however, there's definitely a religion behind this. It's very old, and we can go back into ancient Rome, and we can even find traces of it there with their initiation ceremonies, with the equestrian order and so on, and they're very much, they copied almost the same system, or either that or one copied the other, but it was very similar to the Jewish celebrations or even systems when they had the tent traveling in the desert idea. The Romans did the same thing with equestrian order. They set up a big massive tent, no roof on it, and they had their lit flame and so on, and that's where they initiated their new members. But this was going on across the ancient world, even in Greece as well. So there was a brotherhood already existing in the ancient times who were incredibly wealthy, and we can find traces of it through the philosophers who belonged to these groups, because they talked about the differences between the poor and the rich, the aristocracy and the rest of the public. And some of them even then, like Plato, tried to rationalize the fact that some children could pick up on mathematics very quickly or geometry and so on, because he believed, he says, that he and the elite had lived before. Now, there was a form of reincarnation, very much linked to Hinduism. And the ones who couldn't grasp it well hadn't been born before, so they were a lesser type of being. It was a form of religious classism, where or racism, where they classed you according to had you been born before or not, and that was their evident truth, because they believed that they knew because of a previous life or whatever. And this was very popular, this idea, all right up through the brotherhoods that existed, through the very rich men who came up through the Middle Ages. You find it breaking out again in Rosicrucianism when it first broke out to the general public in France. Same idea. They claimed that not only had the riches and could make you wealthy if you served them well, but they would give you life extension because they knew sciences. And that's still used today, by the way, in high circles. Yeah, and you will get life extension. You will be someone like Kissinger or a Brzezinski or a Maurice Strong, and even Rockefeller himself, trotting across the world when you're in your 90s, giving lectures. They don't get arthritis, they don't get old age problems, they don't go senile. There's something else given to them. So you're absolutely right. But hold on, we'll get back on that when I come back from this break. Hi, folks. We're back, cutting through the matrix and talking to Jacob from New York City. You still there, Jacob?
Yeah, I'm still here. Now, when I see these guys up there in, like Bohemian Grove, and they're doing all, the roads and the fire and the out. Yeah. What religion is that? What book are they reading from, man?
You'll find... You'll find traces of that again in ancient Greece. You'll find it in ancient Rome. You'll find it even in the accompanying literature for ancient Judaism. Because even in Judaism they claimed that the staff that Moses raised in the valley of the serpents for wisdom, the brotherhood of serpents means wisdom. Those in the no Gnostic, high Gnostic. And that was their symbol. And they brought that back, they claimed, and eventually into the Holy Land and planted it in a grove, and the high elders would meet there with the Levites every year. But eventually they claim that when the Romans invaded, they destroyed the grove. So you'll find this in pretty well all the ancient world. The ancient world was not separate, They had commerce and trade and intellectuals traveling back and forth, and builders and all the rest of it. So there was a system, much like today's system, of commerce, wealth, lots of wealth, and trading in slaves, and even depopulation programs, even programs where they moved whole populations after war out of their land, a very common occurrence, and put them elsewhere. Still going on today. Generally, they emigrate now out of the countries we're bombing into the countries that are bombing them. So it's really the same techniques, but they've gone down through the ages under many names, and the underground stream was one system they called underground stream. That was the gaining of knowledge, keeping of knowledge, never to be shared with the profane. And the knowledge really was chemistry and other sciences. And they said in the Middle Ages, they said that eventually our power will reach that of kings and queens and governments, because they'll come to us for their weaponry. And you might call it a military-industrial complex too. But today they've brought all their symbology down into the modern sciences as well, especially medicine, etc., with the serpents and so on, the caduceus, showing there quite simply. And even the computers too. Apple is from the tree of knowledge, that's why.
If I knew what they knew, and I see with NASA, and they have like the Apollo space program or whatever. Yeah. I mean, if I'm one of those elite guys, do I, know what it's all about, even without, knowing what it's all about, just through names and symbols and things like that?
Yeah. Oh, they know what it means. They're very careful how they choose them. Of course they are, because they mean elements of the structure of power, or arms of power, and each arm of power is given a particular name. So they use the ancient deities for their speciality, much the same again as if you find in demonology. In the Kabbalah, for instance, you'll find certain fallen angels had specific purposes so you would call them down if you wanted to use them. And it's still done by some sects today. It's the same thing when they use Apollo. And Apollo, again, his symbol was the serpent, as it was Diana's too. And so they use these terms all the time. Even NASA is an old Aramaic word, meaning the head. So the head or the leader, NASA. And that's why they like NASA. And then even the NSA, if you speak the NSA, it's NASA. It's a similar thing. So they're very careful on how they use these terms and give them names. They've always used the same names all down through history. The profane speak them, but they don't know what it means. They think they know what it means, but they don't really. So what they're really telling you is these terms, when they're used for projects, are theirs. They're in charge of it. It's their project, even though you'll be paying for it.
So they have like their own secret language and whatnot.
It's mainly, actually what it is a compilation of occult terms and terminologies, coupled in a very clever way with say philosophy, or some of the ancient writers of the day that wrote plays even. So they'll add things in and use these terms in amongst them, and they all understand quite ably what they're talking about, because they get a classical education. Yeah.
Okay, and my last question, and I'll be done with it. The skull and bones, man. I mean, what's the root of all that?
The skull and the bones. Well, the skull has always been used, right, even from the ancient to the modern times in the high system, the high cults and the high lodges. It's always been used as a reminder of your own mortality. Because when you join these things, it's not just there to make you aggrandized for yourself. It's also, and they will aggrandize you. They'll get you honors and all the rest of it. But it's not just to fill your pockets. You got a mission to accomplish, and the mission will be the specialty area they put you into, and that's your mission. So you're a knight on a quest, and the skull represents, as I say, the basic reminder of your own mortality. That's all through Shakespeare as well, and you'll find that symbol all across the whole of Europe. And the crossed bones again is a symbol of. It's actually on different levels. It's given different meanings, and this is what they always do from the lower disciple to the higher one. And the lower ones, they'll always tell you that on one hand is crossed. A cross means it's barred. You're barred from entry, unless you understand the passwords, the meanings, and so on. On the other hand, it means that which carries you. Don't forget that which carries you. What carries you is the temples. It's a Jachin and Boaz crossed together. You see? The left path, the right path working together. And that also was the symbol of the Priori de Zion, which the Pope gave the charter to, that became the Knights Templar. And that became their flag for their ships at sea. And that's why it was used as a pirate flag, because they became the pirates eventually when they were tossed out of France. And they plundered all the other ships. So it's still used today. You'll see it all over temples and places in Europe and Britain especially. You'll see the skull and bones, not just in graveyards, but you'll see it on buildings as a sign of where the brothers would meet, you know.
And is the Pope really supposed to be like a fish guy? Like, what's his name? Dogon? Dogon?
Yeah, Dogon was one name for them. There's a couple of names for them. They copied it from India, actually. But, you're gonna understand that they talk about nature. And if you go back into ancient Egypt, you'll find that the Egyptians, said that Ra, Almighty Ra, the God that was behind all gods. And they talk about this today too, that there's a God behind all gods, meaning their God, the one that runs everything. The lower entity that you worship here is basically the Lord of the world. A lower entity. The Greeks were very good at explaining it. He was called the Demiurgos. Anyway, the Egyptians said that the fish, the fish was a symbol of life and superior life, virility. And of course the Nile was even called Happy. And with a god called Happy, because all things came from the water of life. They banked the river and they owned the water, and it nourished them, fed them, and gave them life. But the fish was a symbol of it too. And they've got a lot of old stories of a guy walking out the water. That's all nonsense and stuff. The reality is the fish was a symbol of fertility, with the mouth open to get the water of life, which Ra rained down upon the high priest. Or even a pharaoh who sometimes wore it too, because the water of life was literally the semen actually coming down as rain. That's what they called it. It was the life from the God was the water coming down to fertilize the land and give life to everything. Life symbolized by the fish, and so the mouth is open for it. And even today we use that term. When they take oaths to the Queen and they sing the anthem, long will she reign over us. Reign is literally, they put a slight spelling difference to throw you off. That's what a spell is, it's to throw you off. But it's the same term. She reigns over you. All the gods' hierarchies rain down on you and over you. So it's a very ancient system that folk don't even know what they're looking at. And if you look for it, I never watched the royal wedding, but it took place in Westminster again, just like the Queen was coronated in. I saw the coronation on old reruns. And what you're seeing there is a reenactment of even a system they used in ancient Egypt, and even the system of Nimrod. Nimrod was a guy who wore the mottled fur around his neck. It was white with black spots, like the royalties do today. And he sat too on a raised dais, a sort of form of pyramid. And everybody that you'll see around that throne is standing in the same positions you'll see carved in the old steles of ancient Egypt and elsewhere in the Middle East. So you're watching and you wonder what on earth that they're doing this in England. What's that got to do with the English? It's got nothing to do with the English. So this is a very secretive society. Everything must be done properly. They don't make it up on the spot. You'll stand here with this big scepter and you'll hand it to so-and-so. This is all from ancient books. And you're watching the dominance of an ancient system slowly work through, take over the world today. Yeah.
All right. Well, I won't take any more of your time. Cheers, mate. Keep up the good work, then.
Thanks for calling. And we've got Anthony from New York City as well, if Anthony's there.
Oh, yes. Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks a lot, Alan. I had you spoke about population reduction today in the program, and I just had a question about the Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah.
And apparently they have 10 laws. All of each are written in English, Swahili, Spanish, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and and Russian. And you also spoke about with the previous caller about the ancient orders. They also have some languages here also in Babylonian, Classical Greek, Sanskrit, and ancient Egyptian.
Yeah.
Did those ancient orders speak those languages, and did they have their secret brotherhood in those time periods and in those cultures? And could you just expound upon the 10 laws here? That seems like a mockery of the 10 Commandments on the Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah. They've always used their own ancient languages in the very high orders amongst themselves. That because obviously even if someone could spy on you, which there's obviously no hope of doing with the security that they have, but they have, in case anybody did, they wouldn't know what they were talking about, basically. But it's also a symbol of all of the ancient brotherhoods coming together, because they were all of one brotherhood in ancient times. It doesn't matter what language they spoke. So they'd have high lodges in every city-state, which were actually countries in those days. And so they came down through the ages. They actually were scattered at one point, thousands of years ago. They admit that themselves. There's psalms that were taken out of the Old Testament for Christians, which are still available in the Jewish text, where it talks about them, and how they had their own particular ceremonies. They went underground, meaning inside caves or down under the earth for these ceremonies. And they had these forms of orgies, the kind that you saw in one of the Matrix movies, where they're going to have this kind of strange dance, a very, very paganistic sexual dance. That was all symbolic of that ancient system. Anyway, it says eventually that they wanted they pushed so far, taking over countries and peoples and so on. The people rebelled when they found out what they're up to. They give Nimrod as an example, and they hunted them down all over the deserts. Wherever they found them, they killed them. And when they started up again, these guys obviously used the same old passwords and symbols and handshakes and waves and winks and nods and so on, and the way they stand with their feet. Even Isaiah talks about it in one verse, where they stand and wink, you know. And so you'll find that they've come down through time, rebuilding that which was lost, as they claim. And what was lost was a complete domination of an ancient world, all trade, all banking, all armies, all everything, where most of the people were being turned into slaves in all their city-states. That was how they ran Greece. That's how they ran Rome. That's how they're running the world. People don't realize that they're just wage slaves. And now you don't need a slave master to throw a rag at you or a pair of sandals once in a while. You buy it yourself with a little you're left over. So we're not as poor as those ancient ones, but we're getting to that stage. We will get to that stage by the time they're done. And they plan the future, as they say. They represent the gods, the God of the world. The God of the world blesses you in all your endeavors. You want power, fame, fortune, you join the brotherhood, and they'll make sure that you get it if you serve them in a certain direction. So he's a demiurgos, as I say, the bad-tempered God, the one who can be nice at 1 minute, bad the next. So again, he's got the two hands, he's got the olive branch, and he's got the symbol of the arrows in the other. That's the symbol of Manasseh as well, and a long history to Manasseh, who they claim was the descendants of Joseph, not the other tribes. And that's why they use the Egyptian symbology so much in the US, for instance. That's why Rothschild has that on his crest as well. So it's a long, long story. But if you go into the history of ephod, an ephod as well, it was an eye. It could also be called a basket, but it was also an eye in ancient Hebrew and Aramaic. And you'll find the verse in Isaiah where they talk about those that be careful of those who wink and stand with their feet squared basically together, as they do in the military in Britain, for instance. And that's why they call it square bashing too, in that way you stand at attention. Aten was the god at that time. So it's interesting. It all ties together. It can't be refuted. And yet it's nothing you can take in a court of law, because the law is also their system. The legal system is theirs too. And they're recreating that which they lost, which is their total dominance over the world, to run the world the way that they themselves, being high intellectuals as they believe they are, have the right to rule it. And they use democracy as a front, which is such a joke, because we have no rights at all in democracy.
Can you go into to the Georgia Guidestones and explain what is the reason for those 10 laws and who put that there. And
well, we know that a Mason definitely put it there, or Rosicrucian, and even the name that was given supposedly on the county records of the guy who purchased that little bit of land there and so on was again, I think, Christian Rosenkreuz used from the Rosy Cross, So that's obviously Masonic. The true Rosy Cross, there's two in the U.S. One's a fake, one's a real one. But they do believe the same things I've just been telling you, that the super intelligent have the rights, those who are rich and powerful and who have not married out of lust but allowed the priests to match them up with the proper women of the right qualities. And that's very important. In fact, the gene often comes through the female lineage, not the male. But they say that they want to reduce the population down to the manageable level that they wanted in ancient times and recreate the ancient times where they would live high on the hog in their big marble cities, and the few peasants will simply farm the land. That's what they claim. But I'll speak a bit more when I come back from this break on that. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking to Anthony from New York, who's talking about the Georgia Guidestones, and there's no doubt about it. They've been defaced already by folk who've woken up and rather object to the fact that these guys want to kill them off, and quite rightly so. But the 10 laws, again, go back to very ancient times. On the one hand, it's a symbol of hermaphroditic systems or power, left brain, right brain, all the rest of it, male, female. The one is a male, and of course they don't like females too much except for the gene they carry and their ability to reproduce from their own sperm, obviously. And so it's also, that's 0 is a female. And if you read it backwards too, it's from 10, it's the net. They love the word net. They've got lots to do with net and Poseidon and so on. So they've given a lot of symbology there for their own ones to read. And I think most of these guidestones stand on 4 pillars or so. That's traditional at least. And the 4 pillars are 4 squared. That means perfected. The perfect ashlar basically is 4 squared, and all Masons are said to be ashlars. They become perfectly squared on all sides. In other words, so they're not just normal anymore, normal and ignorant or profane, like a rolling stone, right? They become squared and perfected by the system and the lodge. And that's what that means too. All those who've been perfected will survive. The other ones will be destroyed by what they call the law of nature, and the fittest should go on. But you'll find this traditionally through all, if you know how to read Freemasonic writing, you'll find it through all their talks. They're very seductive, by the way. All these books are written with two systems combined into one. One's exoteric, one's esoteric. The exoteric can tend to put you to sleep. The esoteric, if you keep awake, you'll see the thread of what they're actually saying, but almost between the lines, as they guide your mind, and it captures some people and they become willing recruits. So when you read their stuff, you have to be awfully, awfully careful and not to be trapped by it, because they use a lot of truths and then combine it with their very careful spin that they've worked out over thousands of years to be very successful, and then you're gone. You'll be one of theirs, on a low level, obviously, because you won't have the right genealogy. So these guys all claim to be at least a 3rd generation of perfect breeding. That means their wives were picked for them. The son goes higher than the father. The grandson goes even higher. He can start off at a very high degree at a much younger age and taught. He's the perfect one that they're after, the 3rd generation of perfect breeding. So it's a very, very old system. It's in your face, of course. Jacques Cousteau and all these guys, the guys who loved nature and wanted to kill off the public, all belong to the same organization. And as I say, each branch of it is a specialized branch in its own area. And so you have Rosicrucianism, you have General Freemasonry, you have, look to see what parallel it's on. It's very important. They love the 33rd degree as well. And you'll see that's where they dropped the bomb on Japan, was in the 33rd degree parallel. They love that one so much for the 33rd degree, because that's where the sun goes down, you see, and rises on the 30th and then sets on the 33rd. So they give you these stories of your lumen period, and you have to achieve lots of things by the time you're 30 to at least 33. For the lower Masons, they can get their 32nd degree and a little badge and a little gold watch to wear and all that stuff. But that's the lower Masonry. They're the lower lodge, as Albert Pike called them, the lesser lodge. They're basically a front, as most people in religions are a front for a higher system and don't know it. Scottish Rite of Freemasonry is not Scottish. You speak it. You've got Seraphim. Seraphim is the higher order of angels. That's it for tonight, folks. From Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night to me. Your God or your gods go with you. There's Alan from Scotland. It's a long-distance call hanging on there. Are you there, Alan? Hello.
Hi there, it's Adam actually. It's obviously the Scottish accent that's confused them.
It's confused them, okay, that's right.
Yeah, obviously it's a pleasure to speak to Alan as usual. I've got a question on the hierarchy of this elite. I mean, it's obvious there's certainly elite that's running the show. There's absolutely no doubt about that as far as I'm concerned. Anyone it's not conditioned can see that. I've got a question on the hierarchy of the elite.
Yeah.
Do you think that the top of this elite is the heads of these world banking families?
They're definitely closer to they're definitely closer to the top, and you can find evidence that in Frankfurt, for instance, in the 1700s, and then later in the 1800s, the top bankers there and moneylenders for the nations did have a club, and they had their meetings. They elected their own chairman by themselves and so on, and they did decide the future naturally because they dealt with all economies. They were deciding the future then of countries and deliberating who they should fund for war. If this country lost, could they pay back their debts and so on. Well, it's never really changed. So whenever you get economics and money and borrowing, you're always going to have the same bunch at the top. And they definitely are interbred, though. There's no doubt about it. And if they're not the top, they're much closer to it. They have to be. There's so much perfect coordination between all the factors that create society as we know it today, and shape the generations that are coming out of university now with all their greening. They truly are fanatical now. They've been radicalized. And they're all ready for the collectivist society and the total socialist system. So it's so perfect. There's definitely a big hierarchy, but there's also so many think tanks working at the top, and each think tank has its own specialist area, and then they all come together at the United Nations in all the different departments, and then all the countries sign the agreements and put it into law, all from education to everything, from economics to education. So it's so incredibly vast. You'll never know exactly who's behind it. Sometimes they give little clues away about the clubs that are higher up there. Prince Charles has called himself at one time, mind you, a lot of crazy things as well, but not surprised from him. But he did say he was one of the Olympians. Now the Olympians, as you know, were the gods of ancient Greece. And they used the Olympian Club is a very high art membership society that certainly has a lot of input in running the world even today. These are very rich families, very old genealogies, and they're definitely up there, but perhaps not at the top of the tree, but they're closer to it. I don't think you'll ever see the real people in public. They'll be incredibly rich. Every top politician or prime minister or president will know their names, but I don't think you'll ever find their names in the newspapers. They don't work. They make suggestions, and all the little minions beneath them run to it, make sure things are done, but they never actually give orders as such. When you see a Rockefeller attending world meetings, he's still working. So even though he's high on the hog and he's pushing all the socialist agendas, transhumanism, everything, transsexualism, the whole lot, kit and caboodle, he's still a worker basically. So you can imagine how these guys at the top really are.
Yeah, well, that seems to be the case. And anytime you see any United Nations or any kind of think tanks, there's always the same, as far as I can see, the same families that are controlling that. But obviously I don't know who's absolutely the peak. As you said, it's probably very difficult to determine that. The big trick too.
The big trick as well is to follow both lineages, the male lineage and the female lineage. And that's what confuses us, not to them, because they have their own little clubs that have their lineages and keep it all in order for them. They all know who they are. But as I say, you have to get both lineages to find out exactly who they are, and any name changes at all as well. And they can also adopt certain ones into their families, as the Rothschilds have done as well. But hang on, I'll be back after this break. Hi folks, we're back and we're cutting through the matrix. Is Alan still on the line? Or Adam, I should say, from Scotland. Is he still there?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I was going to say too, another thing to notice too, Scotland, you'd be surprised at the amount of people have come out of Scotland, and done a lot of meddling with this world order. I mean, the University of Aberdeen has always been one of the leading universities for communism and socialism for the world, you know. And the whole idea of solidarity was invented by those guys. And then you find this other odd thing too, is that, you know, that the royal family in London, they always have their cupbearers and special bearers for this and so on. Well, it's always been a Scotsman, the Campbell family, Lord Campbell, who've been in charge of the Great Seal of England. They carry the Great Seal of England for the English. No one's ever explained this strange relationship of certain families, and even from countries that you think are outside of the main country, that there are actually characters in places like Scotland that have more power than most of the English. It's never ever been explained. Yeah.
Absolutely, and as far as I can see, for such a small country, the amount of corruption in this country over the years is incredible. For the size of the country, it's tied in big time to the elite families of the day. Anyway, there's no doubt about that. But obviously, the working class is obviously different. We're not aware of that.
They're not aware at all. They don't even know in Argyllshire where the Campbells are. That's Lord Campbell again. You have these Templar graves all over the place, because when they escaped from France, that's where they went. And so the Knights Templars were big. Of course, they were the big bankers of their day. And that's where the word check comes from. They gave out the first checks back in the 11th century and 12th centuries. They gave out checks in lieu of money. And because they planned, like the Exchequer, there was a chessboard outside, a checkerboard outside in the city of London. That's where they did all their financial arrangements, debts and profit and so on. And that's why they called it a check. And that's why we spell it in Britain differently from America. It's actually from checkerboard, yeah. So they settled in the Highlands there, in the Western Highlands, and they always took the sides of a united Britain. They always went against all the rest of the Scots. And the Lord Campbells. So it's interesting that they're definitely way up high in the tree there, and intermarried with a lot of other foreign bigwigs in other countries as well. And Scotland also gave them the Bank of England, you know. It was a Scotsman that came down from Callander and created the whole idea of the Bank of England. And then, of course, they just sat and waited until Rothschild came along and took it over. But the Scotsman set it up for them. Then another Scotsman was sent over to France, and that created the French bubble by doing the same thing there, by creating a bank for France as well. So there's always been this amazing secret society stuff within Scotland. The Knights Templar, then later on down through the years you have the Masons coming forward, of course, and it's definitely all tied together somehow, yeah.
That's incredible. I realised that most of that was true. I didn't realise the check part you were saying. That's incredible, actually. It originated there. That's
originally, yeah. The Templars used to take in the gold coin, and so on. Even had the Treasury of England. They were in charge of taking it in their own little special place where they guarded it. And you could go to the Middle East. They give you a check, literally a check, because as I say, they did it on the open air chessboard. It was a big thing. They used poles and pushed these checkers along the black and white squares. And they give you a check and say that's where your money is now, symbolizing their vault. And they give you a check in lieu, and you took it to the Middle East, and then you cashed it in there.
That's incredible. I had no idea that was the case. I had absolutely no idea.
And that's why you got the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And the English don't know it. The English don't know it, but I mean, they've never asked why the actual English flag is actually it's a red cross. You know?
Yeah, is that?
It's a Templar cross. Yeah.
I had absolutely no idea that was the case, to be honest with you. I have one more quick question, Alan, if that's okay, then I'll take the answer off the air. It's to do with the Scottish Freemasonry.
Yeah.
I've read some books. I don't know if they're true or misinformation or disinformation or plain like lies, but I've heard that the Knights Templar, once they were obviously cast out of France, come over to Scotland and established the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. We know it's not really Scottish, we know that, but is that how it formed? And also, is the 33rd degree really the highest rank? Obviously it is in the public point of view, but is that really the highest rank?
No. The Scottish Rite of Freemasonry isn't Scottish. It actually is. It was given a charter by the Grand Orient Lodge of France. France, mind you, was given their charter by the English Grand Lodge. But it really came from France, and it was a more atheistic system than the English Lodge. They're all pals together, of course, but it was atheistic, and it was definitely socialistic or communistic in its whole from the very beginning. Benjamin Franklin was a member of it, but they called it the Scottish Rite of Freemasons because, and it didn't start off in Scotland either. The French sent a guy over to the USA, and he ended up in Charleston, South Carolina, and eventually they created a lodge there, and Albert Pike took it over, the actual great lodge for the Scottish Rite of Freemasons, and they spread it across the world from the USA. But it's not Scottish at all. In fact, a lot of the Scots are actually members of the English Grand Lodge.
Yeah, I know that for a fact, actually. That's true. That's incredible. I don't actually know what books to read and what books not to read, because there's so much disinformation and actual lies as well. I don't know what to read, to be honest with you.
Yeah, there's so much tripe put out there. I mean, modern Freemasonry broke out in the 1700s. Now, there's always been the secret societies all down through the ages. Whenever you get rich men coming together, they always make their little society secret. Because they get rich by doing other folk in and profiting off of misadventure or wars and things. So they create secret societies. But we do know that the Templars were in Scotland by the evidence that was left behind, especially in Argyllshire, with the Templar graves and so on. And it's even thought they went over to the Americas, which I wouldn't be surprised if that isn't true. But they never did find their treasure. They had their own fleet of ships when they sailed out of France. And Philip the Fair was after them, of course. Because they were taking over massive landed estates. When knights died off, they would send out their emissaries to try to talk to the widow, and she would often sign over the lands to the Templars. They were taking over huge chunks of Scandinavia, Scotland, England, and the rest of Europe, and paying no taxes, and financially they were becoming an incredibly powerful force to be reckoned with. Their symbol when they went on the sea changed when they were cast out of France to the skull and bones, the pirate flag.
Yeah. I think that's incredible. Absolutely incredible. But
you have to be careful, as I say. Remember too, whatever Masons will put out themselves, even in their own books, they'll have multiple meanings and often a lot of lies in it themselves, because the true secrets of Masonry are kept in higher Freemasonry. They don't care about the low stuff. The higher Freemasons, why do you think it's so secretive, I mean, if they're really a charitable institution, why do you have to have secrets kept from the public? Well, charity is just a front, but what you do know is it helps you get up the ladder, and every darn politician in Britain generally is a member of Freemasonry. It gets them up there, and then they can start scamming off the public purse, and nobody will clipe on them, because they stand up. They're vowed to stand up for a brother, even in a court. So you have these born liars, basically, or at least they can initiated liars, put it that way, and they run the darn system from top to bottom. And you pretty well have to be a member almost in Scotland to get anywhere in the system.
Absolutely, Alan. You've nailed it again. But I'll certainly look into a lot more than that. But as I say, I can't read too much because there's so much disinformation.
I'll try and put a link up tonight to a series that was put out in Britain. It's on the internet, I think, on Freemasonry. And it shows you, you'll see all the scams that they pull on all the different county councils and so on, and it's just amazing. And the cops too, yeah.
Fantastic. I would appreciate that. Thanks very much for your help, Alan, as usual. It's a pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks for calling.